Nat, how you doing?
I am doing well. I had a very good weekend.
Nailed it. Rebekah, how are you doing?
I am also doing well. I'm actually not going to say I'm doing well. I do have a bit of a headache, but I'm okay.
You're fine?
I'm good.
Well, the best thing about okay, if you pair it with doke, you've really got something.
There's that's true. Can't even argue with you there. I am doing okay doke.
So, having said that, what we're going to start with this week, we're just going to talk briefly about prayer. I want to know your thoughts on it first, and we'll probably evolve from there. I'd like to hear your opinions on prayer. I'd like basically for you to touch on three things. I'd like to, and then obviously whatever you have for me. But I want to hear your opinions on like what you think what is prayer, and then like what is the purpose of prayer, and then how has prayer impacted your like day-to-day life, and do you feel that it changes anything? But like we'll unpack them one by one.
Okay, so the first question.
What is prayer?
Okay, what is prayer? Prayer to me is a conversation with God, or Jesus, or the Holy Spirit, or all three of them.
Okay, fair enough. So when you say conversation, do you feel that there has to be like a formality to it? Like Rebekah and I pray very differently, and she gets upset when I bring this up, and I don't say it in a negative way, and she's just sensitive about it. But the way she prays and the way I pray are very, very different. Not structurally, not content wise, but just because she is a way better writer than I am, and I'm just more raw than she is. So my prayers come out as raw. You'll accidentally, if you hear me pray, you'll accidentally hear me slip a dude in when I'm talking to God. I'll be like, listen, dude, I'm not doing well, whereas like hers are because of who she is and the way she was raised and how she writes and her specific relationship with God. Hers are, they're very reverent, to say the least. And I'm not saying either one is better than the other, but like, do you feel that one structure, like, how do you feel about that kind of stuff?
I totally get both sides. I think mine somewhere kind of fall a little bit in the middle. I think it really just depends on the day. Sometimes I'll sit and I'll talk to him like I would talk to any of my other friends. Sometimes I sit and I talk to him and I view him as more father in that aspect, and I'll just come to him with all of my problems, and I know that he's kind of like waiting there ready to hear about my day. But sometimes, like you kind of said, I do some, it's not that I just let him know my feelings, and I think some people might be afraid to do that, but I kind of like you are a little bit more raw with it, where I just say like, God, like you saw that, right? Like, and I kind of will also just be like, I'm upset about this right now. I'm kind of upset that you let that happen. Saying things like that.
That makes sense. I feel like that when you look at the Bible and when you look at the way Elijah prayed and David prayed, like they were pretty raw. But at the same time, when you look at other people who prayed, especially Jesus, it was very reverent, and every word was chosen precisely.
Yeah, I think it really just depends on the mood, to be so honest.
Yeah. What do you think the primary purpose of prayer is?
I think the primary purpose of prayer is to get closer to God and have a closer relationship with Him. The same way that you would talk to your best friend every day or your parents every day. You want to maintain that close relationship with Him for a multitude of reasons. One being just it helps you to carve out time so He could talk to you back. It also, just like I said, helps you feel closer to Him, and that's ultimately the goal. There's a lot of benefits to it, but I think the purpose is to just maintain the close relationship.
Right. Before you go ahead, Rebekah, I'm leaning her in a direction here with this one. Dad used to ask all the time, at least to me. I don't know if he asked you guys this and stuff. do you think that your prayer influences God's decisions on what happens in your life? Because on the one hand, everything in your life God has predestined. But on the other hand, you have free will to make your own decisions. So do you think your prayer impacts anything in your future? As far as, like, let's say you're worried you're going to fail a test, you're worried you're going to get a bad review at work, you're worried something else. You know God does miracles. Do you think your prayer impacts that?
That's a very good question. I often ask the same, like, I think about that question a lot more than I think a lot of other people do. And I think what I've ultimately come down to, and I definitely could be wrong about this, but I feel as though prayer, the biggest thing that it does is changes the way that you go through the circumstance, if that makes sense. So, like, say you were studying for a test or scared you're going to fail an exam or whatever it is. I think the prayer, even though potentially the outcome may or may not change, your energy, like, he can give you so much peace and calmness and help you go through whatever you're going through. To the second part, I'm not so sure.
Well, I would say the first part, you're probably dead on with that, because it says, like, be anxious for nothing, but in all things with prayer and supplication make your requests known to God, you know?
Absolutely.
So having said that, I think you're dead on with the first part. But as for whether or not you think things are predestined or how much free will comes into that becomes a little bit more complex.
Absolutely, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Nah, we'll get to that some other time. I don't have time for that yet. I have a bunch more that we have to get to with you first before we come full circle.
I'd like to make just a quick comment on that, just because I think the big thing, especially in that example of, like, when you're praying for a test and, it's also about learning what to pray for in that instance, because, you can't just sit there and pray for an A and then not do the work and expect that God is going to do a miracle and give you an A.
But he could.
It very well could happen. However, this is a two-way street. And if prayer is how you're building your relationship with God, then you have to also listen back to what he has to say. And if you're over there praying for an A and you're not listening back to him say, well, then study.
Yeah, no, I mean, the Bible does make it very clear that you reap what you sow.
Yeah.
Make no mistake, God is not mocked. What a man sows, so he will also reap.
But I think that's also true, like, also with your prayer life and everything. Prayer is also, like, what you put into it. If you don't have a strong prayer life and you're not spending time in prayer and spending time building that relationship with God, then I don't think you should sit there and expect that your prayers could influence your life in any sort of way. I think that, like, it's a...
But it could.
It could, obviously, but at the same time, that relationship needs to be there. That foundation needs to be there so that you can also be able to hear back from him when you do pray.
It gets really into the weeds, too, because, like, there's verses where it says that God can't hear you if you still have that sin that's hanging over you in your heart that you haven't confessed to him. But at the same time, if you call out to God, it says it's clearly that he hears you and he answers prayers. I would agree it gets into murky waters, but at the same time, clearly, the way I look at it is kind of like a relationship with your spouse or with your parents. Because one or the other. If it's God, then it is your dad. And if it is Jesus, then it is your spouse. And that's kind of how this works. And so, like, when it comes to your spouse, like, you can't expect them to, like, you have to invest the time into communicating how you feel and then listening to what they have back to say.
I think that's a really great analogy.
I mean, that's the analogy that we're given by Christ. He says that, like, the bride of Christ is the church, and all throughout the Old Testament, we're told that the Israelites are the wife of God. 2 different wives for 2 different husbands, and they have 2 different destinies, but they're both engrafted into the same vine. and they're both still tended by the same gardener. You have 66 books penned by 40 different authors, but it's still one contiguous story of redemption and love. Go ahead, Rebekah.
No, I was nothing. You're good.
No, you look like you wanted to say something.
No, I didn't know if Natalie had any like specific examples of times that she has prayed and had prayers answered.
Oh, that's good. We should get into that.
Or like if she had any times that like she specifically has heard an answer directly back after praying.
Yeah, and how you hear God speak, so on and so forth.
I definitely have seen God answer a lot of my prayers. I actually, in the journal that I have, in the front of it, there's a section of prayer requests and then another section on the other side of answered prayers. And I think that's really cool because you can then like look back and see exactly how God answered the prayers in your life.
Mm-hmm.
That's highly recommended by a bunch of big guys. Chuck Missler highly recommends that one too.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the main ones that jump to my mind, though, first of just how God answered my prayers. The first one being I was constantly praying for a friend that would just be in the same walk of faith as me. Because I love being a sprinkler and I love having friends of all different walks and in all different stages of life. Mm-hmm. But I really wanted somebody that could come alongside of me and kind of feed back into me. And she answered that with Ava at the time when I needed a friend the most. So seeing that was really amazing. And then also just my decision to come to Bloomsburg was a very big one. I didn't know if I should do it. I didn't know if I should stay or if I should go and then what it was going to look like. And I really just prayed that God would bless whatever decision I made, like I chose, and I knew that he would. And then in coming to Bloomsburg, I really felt him tell me that how can I have the faith, but how can he show me what he can do with my faith if I don't take the first step?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, that's huge. That's, I think, what we saw with Abraham. He didn't quite step out in faith until his dad died, but as soon as his dad died, he stepped out in faith. And I think that's the biggest part. Like, with any of them, Noah had to start building the ark. It's always the first step you have to take. But also, Bloomsburg, the only town in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
I love that you mentioned step out in faith because, we have a rather big prayer request that was answered. And ironically, it was one that I had been praying for. We'll just put it since Jack's been born. Do you want me to go into the specific details of it?
Which one?
About a certain somebody.
No. Well, we can in a second. I had an even bigger one, to be honest. My bigger one was the one that I had literally in July of 2019, driving back to get stuff from our house.
Oh, well, yes, there's that
and
prayer request.
To me, that's yours. It matters a lot, don't get me wrong. But if mine isn't answered,
yeah,
which it wouldn't have been necessarily 15 years prior.
Well, I'll tell mine and then you can share the 2019 one. Since
chronologically, we should probably
do yours first then.
Okay.
So, I'll fix this later in editing.
Yeah, obviously. Having said that, Nat, for me, one of the biggest ones, 2019 July, as you know, we go to Knoebels in the end of June, right? Nat.
Yeah, I'm listening.
Okay, sorry. I said right, like to get like confirmation. Rebekah will edit this out. We're good. Okay, so 2019 in June we go to Knoebels, and it's actually the first time that you talk to me about anything, as far as religion or spiritual stuff goes. And you asked me the age of the earth, and we're there with the fam jam, and we got the Jack, and you're there with Sparky, but this is before Fluffy. Both of you, can you stop the laughing and hold it together for 2 seconds?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Keep going.
Good night. Both of you are too silly to do this.
Moving on.
Okay. I can't with either one of you. We're gonna have to eventually do like we're gonna have to do a blooper reel eventually where we release these sillinesses. Like, oh my gosh. Okay.
At some point, I just start leaving them in.
Just shush. You're so silly. We can't leave all this in.
Okay, so.
Stop. Okay. From the top. Hero of men. No. Hero of all, really. Not men or women. Now he's hero of all.
Not the movie quotes. I can't keep editing out the movie quotes.
Whatever. But Jack is sick the whole time we're at Knoebels, and it's crazy because it's Knoebels, and he should be happy to be there, but like he barely will ride any rides because he's sick, and we didn't realize he was sick. We had taken him to the hospital starting in like April, all through May, and all through June, and we had taken him probably 5 to 7 times to at least 3 different doctors who all were telling us the same thing, that there was probably just growing pains, or there was maybe an infection. Nobody was really sure what was going on. And then we went to the 4th of July party at Mom's house, and Jack wouldn't even get up and play. And so, like, the next day is when Mom texted me and was like, hey, why don't you just take him to the hospital and lie to the hospital and tell him that he got bit by a tick so that they'll do blood work on him. And I found out later that Mom was also lying to me about why she wanted that done. Because when Mom was younger, when she was like 15, she used to babysit for a kid who was like 3 to 5 years old. And we're talking back in, like the 60s or 70s. And that's back when leukemia was a death sentence for kids. And so Mom babysat for this kid, and he had the same symptoms. And then, obviously, they found out it was leukemia, and it was terminal back then. So this kid died. And Mom didn't want to scare me or freak me out, but wanted me to still do this. So, like, I did, and I took him that night, and we told him it was Lyme disease. They did blood work, and the doctor brought me out into the hall, and he was like, okay, so you know your kid has cancer, right? And I was like, oh, well, thanks for that. That was a slap across the face. And he's like, that's neither here nor there. We need to do an immediate transfusion. We need to do immediate platelets and blood, and we're going to go ahead and send him right now by ambulance to the Children's Hospital in Danville. I was like, okay, cool. Let's get this figured out when we get this figured out. So I signed the paperwork. They start taking him. I call Mom. Mom drives to go pick up Rebekah and bring her to the hospital and leave Dad there with the kids. Because at this time, we have Essie.
And I'm pregnant
and
with Neil.
She's pregnant with Neil. And so Mom brings Rebekah and doesn't even tell Rebekah what's going on. And Rebekah shows up, and she's not sure what's going on. And then Rebekah rides with the ambulance to Danville. I drive back to get stuff because I know what's going on, and I know we're about to be stuck at Danville. So I have to drive back to the house to pick up a bunch of stuff for Jack that'll make him comfortable, and stuff for Rebekah that'll make her comfortable, and like laptops and stuff to make, like, so we have stuff to watch while we're there, and coloring books and stuff. Which is a longer story for another time about what we learned about dealing with sickness and the state of mind and keeping positivity and keeping God in all of it. Which, I mean, it is all part of answered prayer, so we'll get to that later, but that's neither here nor there yet. The point is, that drive from the hospital, once Rebekah had gotten with Jack and was riding in the ambulance to Danville, she still didn't know what was going on because I couldn't tell her. And so I had to drive back to the house, and I mean, from Scranton to Clark Summit, you're talking it's like a 9-minute drive. That was like the worst 9 minutes of my life, and I literally, it was just me. Like, I probably took a lot longer because I was crying way too much, just pouring out my heart and begging and pleading that I wasn't going to lose my best friend. We're gonna have to pause.
Yeah. We're just pausing for a second, Nat.
No, yeah, I got it.
Look at me.
Sorry.
Whoa, not cool, bro.
Calm down over there.
Anyway, so basically we were like, all right, let's make a deal. And you should never really make deals with God unless you're willing to follow through on them. We learned that from Jephthah in the Old Testament. I don't know if you know about Jephthah. You know about Jephthah?
Yes.
And his vow with his daughter?
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, again, people misinterpret that verse. Someday when we get into the Old Testament, we'll get into it. People think like he actually sacrificed his daughter. No. It was much like old girl did with Samuel. The mom.
Oh, like gave him back to God.
Yeah.
It's like,
who's the mom for Samuel?
Hannah,
thank you. Much like Hannah gave Samuel back to God. That's basically what Jephthah did with his daughter, with his vow. So you should never really make vows with God unless you're willing to follow through with them. God makes it pretty clear in the Bible, let your yes be yes, let your no be no. Like, do not make a vow if you're not going to follow through on it. And it's interesting when he makes covenants with Moses and with Abraham, it usually is not conditional on what they do because he knows man's going to break their vows. So, like, don't make vows with God. Having said that, yeah, we were like, listen, I'll trade. If you'll give me him, you can have me instead. And that's why we left Pennsylvania to come down here and to start our ministry instead, was because it was like, okay, it took a minute, but after a couple years, Jack's good to go. And it's like, all right, fair is fair. But that's the biggest and most important prayer he's ever answered for me. And ever since then, he's answered a bunch. I needed prayers like, oh man, holy cow. As Cat Williams says, I don't know how people don't understand God and science working together. And it's like, if you believe in science, then you can't believe in God. It's like, no, Jesus was in my science class. I prayed before every science test. But having said that, even moving down here, he found us a house, and like the circumstances for too many things are too ridiculous to have worked out by any other means. So like we also keep track of our prayers and that they've been answered. And for me, that's the biggest one, but it ties right into Rebekah's biggest prayer, but she has been praying since 2015.
So obviously, especially with Jack and the whole situation surrounding that, after he was born, I don't want to get into too many details because I know that this will be more part of like our testimony later on.
Because we have to do the second one.
But I spent like 6 months going through like a custody battle and such, and knew that like my sole purpose was just to get full custody of him, and ended up being able to do that. And like again, like that was obviously an entire God thing. Just with that was like a very hard 6 months though of just like trusting that he was going to do it. And then immediately after that though, I started like getting pressured by a lot of people in my life that I needed to try and sue back for full custody. And full custody. I had full custody, but to sue back basically to have him sign his rights away. And because he still had legal rights, even though I had full custody, he had like visitation. If that makes sense. Anyways, so I wasn't gonna do that though because like I had prayed about it to begin with, because I had the option to do something along those lines when I originally was fighting for full custody, and had prayed about it and was told, not to do this. And had like I said, people were asking me like, to do this, and I kept saying like, no, I'm not going to, like, because when I had like finally prayed about it after getting full custody, God had very specifically told me like, I will give it to you one day. Like, you don't need to ask for it. You don't need to try and push for it. You don't need to sue for it. Like, I will give it to you one day. Just be patient. And so I did. And, like, even throughout the years, like, there would be times when crazy things would happen. And the idea again would come up to sue for him to sign his rights away. And we would pray about it. And every time, like, it would always end up basically coming down to, like, my decision. And I would know instantly, like, I'm not supposed to do this. We have to just wait on it. And, like, we can't push it any further. Like, it will happen.
And it was an interesting dialogue because we would have to discuss it. And I wasn't always on the same page as her. But the minute, like, she would explain that, like, no, God is specifically telling me
Like,
this.
he told me years ago, he will give it to us one day. And that I cannot sue for it. I cannot ask for it. He will give it to us one day. And
So I would say, all right.
And Charles, yeah, he'd finally be like, okay, fine. If that's what it is, then fine. And so then flash forward even more into our marriage and such, and we get to the point where we have, like, been talking for months on end that we needed to leave Pennsylvania and go back and, go back to the South and start a ministry. We both knew that that's where we were called to and that that's where we were going. We kept sitting back and forth trying to figure out where we were supposed to go. And it was like we had finally landed on where we were supposed to go. And it was down to a matter of telling your parents now that we were going to go.
We also hadn't actually landed on a spot. We had landed on a
general location.
2-hour to 3-hour wide location.
We knew a state where we were going.
Yes, which neither one of us had ever been to before.
No.
And we're very hesitant to step out in, much like Abraham.
And so then it was like a matter of telling your parents. Because, you can sit there and talk about plans until you're blue in the face. But until you start, like, taking that step out of faith and actually going forward with it, you're not going to get that to happen, right? And so we finally decided to move. We decided to tell your parents. So, I literally told your mom and then, like, went back into the house. And now, like, because of the arrangement, I have to, like, inform the other person about our changes of location and stuff like that whenever we move.
Moving out of a state, yeah.
And everything. And so, and I only have, like, so many days that I have to be able to do it in. And so we were going to be moving in a month, and I only have 30 days that I have to inform them by. So I went ahead and texted this individual to just, like, let them know. And, like, it wasn't even anything more in the text, just to simply state, hey, just want to let you know that we're going to be moving to Mississippi.
Well, we should also point out, too, that there had been times where this person had caused some problems where we tried to solve it on our own, and we'd do things like, you know what? Let's get an alpaca and register it as a service animal.
Okay, that's not necessary right now.
Then edit it out, but that's fun.
Anyways, point is, I went to go send the text and say that we were moving to Mississippi, that I didn't have an exact address, but that I would have one soon, and, like, let them know where we were going to be at and everything. And, I got, like, back the typical just, like, okay text message. And then, like, not even a minute later, another text message that was just like, hey, I've been thinking about it, and I've decided that I really think that, I should just sign my rights away and let Charles have full custody of Jack and be able to adopt him because he deserves it. And it was, like, this crazy, completely out of character for this individual text message that was like, well, that just confirmed that we're supposed to be going to Mississippi because, like, I've been praying for this prayer for, when did we move in? 2020, 2021? 2021?
No, it would have been 2020, right?
Either way, I had been praying this prayer for 5 or 6 years.
February of 2020.
And, like, when it happened, it was like my mouth just fell on the floor.
Oh, you mean that move? No, but yes, that was 2021. That was May.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
No, I mean, it was weird, to say the least, for that one to happen. But at the same time, that's kind of how it works. Like, you kind of have to take that first step before you see things. I don't know if you remember. You remember Mark Stenzi, yeah?
Yeah.
Pastor Stenzi?
Yeah.
Yeah. He gave a sermon one time about rhinoceroses and about how a group of rhinos is called a crash and how they can run at X amount of miles an hour. I want to say it's like 35 miles an hour. But they can only see at that speed roughly 10 feet ahead of them. That's why a group of them is called a crash. And it's kind of how it works. Like, God's word is a lamp unto your feet and a light unto your path, but you really only get to see one step at a time, because if you take more than one step, if he showed you where you're supposed to go before you got there, you'd try to find your own way to get there. And it's like, all right, I got you. Well, I'll give you a picture of where you're supposed to be, but I'm only telling you where to go one step at a time. That way because if you run on up ahead or if you lag behind him, you're going to get off the wrong path. It's not going to work. You got to walk like that. Like, it's got to be right next to him, you know?
Yeah.
And as Rebekah loves, sometimes when you only see one set of footprints in the sand, why is it, Rebekah?
Because that's when he carried you.
No, it's because sand people always walk single file to hide their numbers.
I'm sorry, Natalie. I'm sorry, Natalie. Actually, I don't know why I'm apologizing. He's your brother. You should know this by now.
He's my cousin. I have to bring him.
Here's what I'll say. Never apologize for a Star Wars reference.
So having said that, we both have had two huge answered
even
prayers.
Natalie has, because you're her.
And you
Ava.
had your huge Ava answered prayer. And I can't even tell you how many silly prayers I've had answered. I wanted a sheep my whole life. Since I was a little kid, God eventually gave me 4 alpacas. Can't beat that. I wanted to live in basically what became my house in Clark Summit since I was little. God gave me that. And it's not when I wanted it, and it's not how I would have went about it. But I got what I wanted. And it's usually only happens when I'm doing what he wants. I think they make that pretty clear, that all things work together for good for those who are the called is the first caveat. And according to his purpose is the second caveat. And so I think that's kind of how it works.
Yeah. Absolutely, I agree.
All right, my next question about prayer, to get back onto the subject here. Good night. Do you know about William Tyndale or George Mueller?
Not.
George Mueller?
He sounds familiar.
Fair enough.
Not
And
really.
Charles Finney.
Nope.
All right. So these are my 3 favorite examples of prayer in history. As far as answered prayer. Because sometimes the answer is yes and sometimes the answer is no. And sometimes it's a ridiculous miracle and sometimes it's not. But we'll start with William Tyndale. Because I'm stealing these from, my favorite, Adventures in Odyssey. But having said that, William Tyndale, he's translating the Bible into English. And they throw him in jail. And his prayer in jail is that they will let him out and that the Bible will be translated into English. Then we flash forward and we get to George Mueller. George Mueller owns an orphanage in England. And we're talking like, probably, if I had to take a stab at it, late 1800s. And he goes on to own a series of orphanages, and he does a lot of good work in England for the poor. But at the time, he has no money, him and his wife, and they have no food at all in the house, and no milk at all in the house. And he brings all the kids down from their rooms in the orphanage to have breakfast one morning, even though they have nothing. And they sit down, and George is like, we're going to pray and thank God for our food. And they're like, okay, but we have none. As he's praying, a milk cart that's out front, like a horse-drawn carriage with milk in the back, the cart breaks, and so it's stuck, and so they have nothing to do with all the milk, and it's right in front of the orphanage. So the dude knocks on the door, and he's like, do you guys want this milk? Because we don't want it to go to waste. So now he's got milk for the kids. At the same time, the baker is going by, and he has too much bread left over from yesterday. And he's like, do you guys want this? I don't want it to go stale. So now they have bread. It's very interesting. It's a very give us this day our daily bread kind of thing. But it doesn't happen until he sits down at the table to pray. You get Charles Finney. Charles Finney's in Ohio. It's a little bit later on, still early though, probably like 19 teens, if I had to guess. Maybe earlier than that. I'd have to take a stab at Charles Finney's date. I'm not sure. But they're having a terrible drought that year. All the crops are going to die. And he tells everybody in town to meet him at church one day, and then he's going to pray for rain. And he shows up, and he's got an umbrella. And the news crews show up, and all the people show up, and nobody really thinks that this is going to work. They think he's a crazy pastor. And he prays for rain, and it starts raining. Hadn't rained in like over a year and a half. Crazy stuff. We flash back to William Tyndale, though. And he gets burned at the stake at the end for heresy, for trying to translate the Bible into English. Now, a few years later, the Bible is translated into English, and that's where we get our King James Bible. But, I mean, all of them, their prayers were answered, but all in different ways, you know?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, does that happen for everybody every time? Not necessarily. Sometimes the answer is no. And what I love to point out is if you want a good example of why God doesn't answer every prayer, wait till your 10-year high school reunion. Then go look at everybody you went to high school with that you used to pray, oh God, I wish I could end up with this person. I wish I could end up with that person. And then be like, oh, thank goodness, God, that you did not answer that prayer. Good call on your part.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so real.
What else we have, Rebekah, other than my rambling nonsense? Because I have a bunch of rambling nonsense, but we might save it for next time.
I mean, I don't know. Does Natalie have any other thoughts on prayer?
It also depends on how much time she has. And how tired she is.
Oh, I'm good.
Oh, believe you me, if we take this too much further, you're going to get 30 minutes of really, really good, really, really crazy stuff about prayer. Or you can go ahead and you can interject with your stuff and we can wrap it up in the next 10 to 15 minutes.
I mean, I got a half an hour. Let's hear it if it's good.
All right, fine. You're crazy. It's good. Okay. Here's my opinion. And this is where we start getting into the references. I think that basically what is prayer and what is the primary purpose of prayer, the first two questions I asked you to start this all with, it's my opinion that prayer is nothing more and nothing less than asking God for something. I understand why you think it's conversational. It's talking with God. I get it. And you'll hear other people say that it is adoration, that it's worship, that it's praise, that it's thanksgiving. But I literally think it's just asking God for things. And I don't think everybody agrees with me because they think it sounds crazy. It sounds a little Joel Osteen-y. It sounds like name it and claim it, blab it and grab it. God give me a jet and then I get a jet kind of thing. But I think that is all that prayer is. And I think it comes down to two things. To defend that, it comes down to like the Lord's Prayer and then the meanings of the words for prayer that are used in the Bible, definitionally, semantically. And so when it comes to the Lord's Prayer, do we have the Lord's Prayer, Rebekah, pulled up? Matthew 6.
We will, just a second.
Okay. Sorry. As soon as she gets the Lord's Prayer pulled up. That's my first offense. And we're doing this in, what are we doing this in, NKJV or KJV?
NKJV.
That'll do well enough. Let's pull it up here. Can I see?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So, in Matthew 6, we start off with, we'll start with verse 5, because that's where you pick up the Lord's Prayer. It's called the Lord's Prayer, the Model's Prayer. We all know it, like however you want to say it. I would personally call it the Disciples' Prayer, because it's not really the Lord's Prayer. The Lord prayed a different prayer. The Lord's Prayer was in the Garden of Gethsemane when he said, if there's any other way, please let this cup pass from my hand, but nevertheless, not thy will, or my will, but thy will. That's the Lord's Prayer, in my opinion. That was his heart. But at the same time, this is a good prayer for the disciples, and so they call it the Lord's Prayer. But having said that, starting in verse 5 of Matthew 6, and when you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corner of a street, that they may be seen by men. Assuredly, I say, they have their reward. But you, when you pray, go into your room, and when you have shut the door, pray to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. And when you pray, do not use vain repetitions as the heathens do, for they think they'll be heard for their many words. Therefore, do not be like them, for your Father knows the things you need before you ask him. In this manner should you pray. Our Father, who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. And so this is where right off the bat, people will say, see right there, it's praise and it's worship. And it's like, no. That's not what it means. When it says hallowed be your name, it means make your name to be hallowed by the nations. Make it to be revered among the nations. And when you look into Ezekiel 36:16, you see that's how it works. And when you look into Exodus, in chapter 20, verse 7, you see the same thing. In Exodus, it tells you don't take the Lord's name in vain. In Ezekiel, it tells you that the Lord hallows his name above everything else. And so, that's where we start out, is he's asking, Lord, make your name to be revered among the nations. The next thing, your kingdom come. And that's about as clear as you could put it. Cause your kingdom to come. Make your kingdom to happen here on earth. The next sentence, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Okay, cool. How is his will done in heaven? Well, the angels carry out his will immediately, joyfully, and so you're asking him to make it the exact same for humans. Like, you're asking for the kingdom to come to earth. And you're told that there's a crown in Revelation for people who pray for the coming of the kingdom. And I don't think enough people pray for the coming of the kingdom, but that's exactly what it's saying. Cause your kingdom to come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Carry it out joyfully. We want people to start following Christ. The next thing, give us this day our daily bread. And whether that's bread for today or bread for tomorrow, the idea is it's still bread. And you're asking God to basically supply your daily needs, like we just saw earlier with George Mueller, when he prays for bread. And he's literally just, you're just asking for bread. It is interesting to note that it's not cake, it's not steak, it's manna, it's bread, it sustains you. And people complain when you get too much manna and quail, but it's still just, all of your daily needs are provided for you. There was a kid I used to work with here named Robbie, and Robbie always stressed about stuff that was going on in his life because he had just gotten married and so on and so forth. He had a lot of stress going on, and every single time he would talk to me about his stress, we'd go over to the window. I'd be like, Robbie, come look what I see. Come look what I found. And he'd be like, what? I'd be like, look. He'd be like, what? And I'd point over to the parking lot where all the seagulls were eating leftover French fries and stuff. And I'd be like, dude, look. You see all those seagulls? God's feeding them, dude. You don't think he's going to do the same thing for you? If he feeds the seagulls, they don't sow or reap and store away in barns, and yet their Heavenly Father feeds them. You're not more important than the birds, bro? And he'd be like, stop. He would get so mad at me. He'd be like, stop with the seagulls, man. I get it. I know what you're saying, and I know you're right, but enough with the seagulls. I'm not coming to look at your seagulls anymore.
What did you say?
That's one of my favorite verses.
Yeah. Well, and the next...
6:26.
Yeah, and then you get right into, even the lilies of the fields. Like Solomon in all of his riches and glory was never clothed the way of the lilies of the fields, which are here today and gone tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So if God cares about them, how much more does he care about you? And
I tell that to Ava all the time.
That's how it works. And if you ask God, like what child who asks their dad for a piece of bread, their dad gives him a stone. Or if he asks for an egg, he gets a scorpion. Like, that's not what dads do. So if that's what regular human dads do, how much more will your Heavenly Father do for you if you ask? But it all comes down to asking. So next, we get into verse 12. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. That one's interesting because he has caveats with it too. Because it's the only one where there's an amendment. If you don't forgive them, neither will your Father in heaven forgive you. Hang on, Jack is here. Let's take a brief pause here. All right, I'm going to continue with that. The next one, so that one's pretty clear too. You're still asking in all of these. Your first one was to ask, make your name hallowed amongst the nations. Your second one was to make your kingdom to come, cause your kingdom to come. The next one was, please make your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Make people love you and worship you. The next one was, give us this day our daily bread and take care of us. The next one was, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. You're asking in every single one of these. And the next one is, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. But in James, we're told that God doesn't leave you into temptation. So the best I could do is probably to say that, like, if I'm left to my flesh, I'm going to sin. I'm going to stumble right into temptation. So lead me daily in a way where I don't. Because a spiritual life is nothing more and nothing less than a life that is led by the Spirit. And that leads to spiritual maturity. And so you're going to have this constant conflict between the Spirit and the flesh, but at the same time you're asking God daily to lead you in a way where you will be led around the temptation. You're not going to have to deal with it as much. And then, obviously, you get the final verse, or the final half of verse 13. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Yeah?
Yeah.
Here's the problem. I'm surrounded by Catholics down here, and we grew up surrounded by Catholics up there. So both in the southeast and the northeast, you have Catholics, two different types. In the northeast, you have Irish Catholics, and you have Italian Catholics. Down here, you have a lot more French Catholics. But Catholics nonetheless. The Catholics don't pray that part of the Lord's Prayer. They leave it out. They will not say, for yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. And it's because at the time when they got their canonical Bible, it was based on the Latin Vulgate, and that was actually very, very good. And so that is not in there. It does come directly out of a different part of the Bible, out of 1 Chronicles 29. You find that exactly in there. But it's not actually in the Bible there in Matthew. So what you get out of that is ask, 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 ask. So basically, the Lord's version of prayer is just telling you to ask. So, my second defense of why I think prayer is simply asking God for things is the words that they use in Greek in the New Testament for prayer. Rebekah, can you pull these up for me real quick? Mm-hmm. The first Greek word is proseuchomai. I think there's like 5 or 6 words that we got here in Greek that we got to go over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, we got 6 of them. I'll be quick about them. Proseuchomai is the first word for prayer. And it is in James 5:17. And basically, proseuchomai is a general word for prayer. It's always to God. It's not to another human being. There's other verses where we see it too. We see it in Matthew 6. We see it in James 5:17. But we're going to do the James one, Mama Chan. James 5:17. Where it says, Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3 years and 6 months. So that word is proseuchomai in the Greek. And so it just means to ask God for something. It's a generalized word for prayer. The next word is aiteo. And for aiteo, Mama Chan, we're going to look at James 1:5. It's also found in Matthew 7:9, but we'll look at James 1:5. But basically, aiteo is like, it still means to ask, but it means like a lesser person asking a greater person for something. And so what we see in James 1:5 is, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives it to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. The word is still prayer, and it's another word, just means ask, but it's aiteo. And so now we got two words for prayer that both just mean to ask. The next word is deomai. And deomai shows up in Matthew 9:38. And it specifically highlights a need. Do you have it for me? Thanks. Therefore, pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest. And if you look at verse 37 right above it, I don't know why it didn't actually pull them all up. Can I see full chapter here?
Yeah, just take the first part.
Oh, read full chapter. There it is. No, it's right there. I just have to hit read full chapter, and I have to wait for your thing to load. It's okay. Matthew 9:37 and 38. I should have told you. I don't know why I won't do it. Thank you. You're awesome, Rebekah. Okay. Starting in 37. The harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. So that word for pray also still means ask, but it emphasizes that you have a great need. The harvest is so plentiful, but the workers are so few. The next word that we get is erotao, which we find in Matthew 15:23. And erotao is, again, a word for prayer, but it means to ask. The closest thing in English would be like to ask a question, or to ask for something. But it implies that there's a familiarity between the two people. Do you have it, Mama-chan?
Hold on.
Okay. But erotao in Matthew 15:23, what we see is that there's a woman of Canaan who came from that region and cried out to him, saying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed." But he answered her not a word. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she cries out after us." And so that in verse 23, when we see his disciples came to him saying, "Send her away," what we find is that they came and they prayed to him. But it doesn't mean pray as in that sense of pray, like pray. It just means to ask. But if you can get it from their tone, they're not asking him like, they're asking him on an equal level. Like you would ask one of your buddies, like, "Dude, come on, can't you get rid of this girl? Like, she's annoying all of us."
Yeah.
And so, again, out of erotao, we still get the word pray just means ask. Parakleo is the next word, and it's the second to last one. We're almost done with these, I promise. Parakleo, we get it in Romans 12:1. And it is basically much more like begging. And so in 12:1, it says, "I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your body as a living, holy, acceptable sacrifice to God, which is your reasonable service." But we also find the exact same one in We find it in 2 Corinthians 12:8. But it's basically, I beseech thee. You're begging the person. But it still means you're asking. And all these words just mean pray. These are all the words for prayer that I could find in the New Testament. There's only 6 of them. I don't need that verse right yet, my much one. It's fine. We're not going to do 2 Corinthians 12:8. Like, you can pull it up, but that's basically the gist of it. And then the last one is entails. And entails we find in Acts 25. And we find it in Hebrews 7:25. But we'll start with the Acts 25. And you find entails the hardest one because it only pops up 5 or 6 times in the New Testament. But it basically has the idea that 2 people, by happenstance, came together, and then you asked on behalf of that person. And so you have Paul's appeal to Caesar is in Acts 25, and then in Hebrews... Mount John. Well, you and your hair.
Sorry.
Hebrews 7:25. The point is, in Acts 25, basically the Jews came together to make charges against Paul, and so it's like people came together, but then they're asking on behalf of someone else to like do something. And in Hebrews 7:25, it's therefore he is also able to save to the uttermost those who come to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. And so the idea of interceding for them or making a request on the behalf of someone, whether it's positive or negative, is the basic gist you get out of entails. And so the negative side of it is the Jews accusing Paul in Acts 25. The positive side is when God ever lives to intercede for us in Hebrews 7:25. So, basically, my whole opinion on it is it means ask, ask, ask. And prayer is nothing more and nothing less than asking God for something. Doesn't mean you're going to get it, but it's asking God for anything. That's my definition of prayer. Weird definition of prayer, right?
Very interesting.
I mean, it's hard to poke holes in it though, right?
No, you backed it. So at first I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, I clickbait people into things. So I clickbait.
But then I was like, dang, okay.
No, yeah, I mean, and don't get me wrong. Prayer should include praising God. Prayer should include worshiping God. But that's not what prayer is. That's just things that you do along with it. Like, it makes it very, very clear that you should enter into his courts with thanksgiving into his heart, in your heart, and into his presence with praise. Like, that's how this works. And we're frequently told that it's how it works. Like, you should be praising God. I start out all of my prayers thanking God for the day and telling him how wonderful he is. But that's not the prayer. The prayer in and of itself is just asking him. But it's not to obtain or to get anything. That's not how it works. But that doesn't mean that it's not asking. So that's my next part that I wanted to get to, is if the definition of prayer is asking God, then what's the purpose of prayer?
Yeah.
If it's not to obtain, then that kind of leaves what is the purpose of prayer? And so I think you nailed a lot of it earlier when we were talking. I think God or Dad has nailed it before too. That was weird. That's a Freudian slip is what they call those. I think Dad has touched on it too. Dad's opinion on prayer is he thinks it lines up your heart with God's heart.
Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it. And I think that's part of it. And for you, it's also to give you peace, which also is a big part of like lining up your heart with God's heart. For me, I don't think that's the primary purpose of prayer either. I think the primary purpose of prayer is what we talked about earlier. It's that journal, that notebook. I think the purpose of prayer, and it also still is what Dad's saying, but I think you could encompass both of the two of those things in one sentence. I think the purpose of prayer is anything that makes God seen. So, for instance, when you see a mountain, you're like, oh, I see the majesty of God. When you see like a little butterfly, you see like, oh, I see like the delicate nature of God. And you see God's heart in everything that he does. You see his fingerprint all over the galaxy. when he answers a prayer that you don't deserve, you see how he's so gracious, and you're getting my personal favorite definition of grace is the acronym definition of grace: God's riches at Christ's expense. You don't deserve it,
Yeah.
but because Christ paid the bill, you get it. So when God answers prayers that you don't deserve, you see God's grace. When God answers prayers that you don't deserve the opposite way, you get compassion and mercy, and you see his fingerprints everywhere and his love and who he is. And when he answers a hard riddle way down the line, you see how forethinking he is and how everything is planned out if you follow him. And so I think that the primary purpose of prayer is anything that makes God seen so that he can be glorified. Because I think we find that in John 14:13. It's so that God may be glorified, so that people can see his good work and praise God. That's why Jesus intercedes for us. He intercedes so that we can see God's good work everywhere and praise him. Like it says, we love him because he first loved us.
I think that's really, yeah.
And
really
I think
nailing it.
Yeah, anything that causes you to worship God, that's him being seen, you know? And so that, to me, is the purpose of prayer, is so that you can see God's handiwork and worship him, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, you literally couldn't have said it better. And I think everything you said, again, you had me in the first half where I was like, but there's no arguing with that.
Well, that's what I like to do. I like to clickbait people in.
It was success. It roped me in.
Because especially, I did it to a couple of my friends down here that are Baptists, and the minute you say the purpose of prayer or the definition of prayer is to ask God for things, oh boy, watch a Baptist's face light up when they think you're crazy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they're very rational people, and they love God, and they get it. The minute you explain it all, they're like, oh, yeah, no, I agree with that.
Yeah, it's just the way that you phrase it. It has me in the. It's like
I know, but otherwise you don't get the whole picture, because people will only pick one. Like, for instance, Dad's whole thing, does it work? If you pray, does it change what God was going to do or not? Or does it just get you on board with his plan? And then with you and it comforting you, it's like, okay, yes, but to put it all into a big picture, I think that's the best all-encompassing way to view what both of you are saying, because you're both very, very correct, you know?
Yeah.
That's why I wanted to do this one with you specifically. Because I thought about doing this one with DJ, but I was like, no, I really want to do this one with Nat.
I thought it was great. I love learning about this stuff. And I know you sometimes think you ramble and like you're boring. I was just telling Dad this the other day, where you have a way of explaining things that are very hard to understand in a way that I can get, and in a way that keeps me roped in. And, I think you're so good at that. And I think that it's going to help a lot of people.
I mean, I appreciate that. Hopefully it does help people. I think I'm a crazy person, but that's probably just the voices in my head that tell me I'm crazy. And they don't always agree with each other either, so that doesn't help.
Yeah. No, I get that. But I think that was great. And I did not know a lot of that, but I'm definitely going to use that going forward.
I like looking into the Greek words and everything. It definitely gives you a better understanding of what a verse actually means. Because so many other languages, we have it as well too, but you'll have multiple words that will all mean the same thing, but yet slightly different.
Or they'll have words for things that we don't have words for, like the German with Sitzpinkler.
Yeah. Yes, the German have a lot of unnecessary words. And the same thing, it's too, it's also just giving you a clearer understanding too, because we kind of touched on this last time with the Bible translations and things like that. we know that they've been translated, and some versions are translated word for word, some are translated by phrases, some are translated and then rewritten so that you can better understand. And it's like, when you go back to the original Greek and Hebrew, you get the right picture versus what people have tried to make those pictures look like.
And we have original copies of them anyway, so it's not that hard to go back and look. And there's so many resources on the internet now, like just apps that you can download, like Blue Letter Bible or anything like that, where you just click on a word and it'll show you all of its Greek and Hebrew words and every other reference for it in the Bible. And it makes researching stuff like this, it takes like no time at all to do this little type of research.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think that's awesome.
Everybody's different, but I find a lot of value in looking at the original Greek and Hebrew, because they both communicate different things very differently. God picked the people he picked for a very specific reason. The Greek language is so precise. There is no more precise language than High Greek. The Koinonia Greek is the most precise language because every verb has to meet like 6 or 7 different tenses. And it is so, you can, instead of just asking for another pencil, they have a word that means hand me another pencil of the same kind, and one that means hand me another pencil as in a different kind of pencil. But for us, we just have the word another. And so it's like, man, the Greek language is so precise. On the other hand, the Hebrew language lends itself to doing a play on words so much more easily. Like, you can make a lot more, it lends itself to syntax a lot better. And so it's more colorful, and you can say more things in a much more hidden, concealed kind of way. And it's because the Old Testament is in the New Testament revealed, and the New Testament's in the Old Testament concealed. But God designed it all as a plan. Like, it was a mystery of days hidden past that was then revealed in the New Testament. It is what it is. And it's because blindness, in part, happened to the nation of Israel because they rejected their Messiah until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. And then they'll say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. But until then, the blindness, in part, happened to the nation of Israel. But, yeah. That's Hebrew and Greek. When you look into their language, especially when it comes to the Bible, words start to make a lot more sense. But you can also easily get bogged down in the weeds.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to do some research.
Well, that's why I tell everybody, like, don't listen to what I have to say. Like, I very easily could mess all this up. I'm not good at any of this by any stretch of the imagination. However, do your own research. Figure it out. Like, that's who doesn't love Acts 17:11, where the men of Berea are more noble than those in Thessalonica, because they search the Scripture daily. They receive the Word with all readiness of spirit and mind, but then they search the Scripture daily to see if those things are actually true. Having said that, do you have any questions for us today? Because I think Rebekah left it open for you to go ahead and come up with a question. But you might also be tired.
I feel like I can come up with a question. I just want to come up with a good one, so please hold.
Liar! She's a liar. Get back, witch!
I'm not a witch, I'm your wife. And that's what you said. I'm not even sure I want to be that anymore.
You never had it so good.
Natalie, do you know that
Not another word, Natalie!
Do you know...
Comes from the sun, stinking sun.
I can't deal with either of you. You're just going to go back and forth with your movie quotes, aren't you?
I've never done it for so cheap. Except for once, but that was a very noble cause.
This is a noble cause.
Oh, yeah?
Yes. I have a stuffed animal ROU.
It's chocolate. It helps it goes down better.
I also just like it. You think it's gonna work? It'll take a miracle for that miracle.
You just wiggled your head. That doesn't make you a little happy?
First of all. Bye-bye, boys. Have fun storming the castle.
Wait, that was actually so good.
I'm secretly a voice actor in my spare time. I have a stuffed animal, ROUS. That's all I wanted to say.
If Isaac and I watched that movie, if I put it on, he like want to go leave and play video games, but he can't because the whole movie's just that good.
It is. It's a good one.
No more rhymes now. I mean it.
Anybody want a peanut?
Anybody want a peanut?
Rebekah literally just said to me, "You seemed concerned" on my way home. And I said I wasn't concerned. Or we actually flipped it because she said you seemed concerned. I was like, I wasn't nervous.
Oh, that is so good.
It is our wedding movie.
It is.
Wow.
She doesn't get eaten.
True love. Marriage. Marriage is what brings us together today.
Natalie, do you know
Even
that
that was so good.
Do you know that I had to edit out 7 minutes of Charles and I talking about VeggieTales at the end because I was like, I think 5 minutes is enough. We probably don't need to have the last 7 more minutes of us talking about VeggieTales in here.
That's actually really funny.
But it's a long, and then it just ends, and I was like, we didn't even make an ending for this. We just literally kept talking about VeggieTales, and then the kids started making noise, and the recording just ends. I was like, well, we clearly had a lot going on that day.
Yeah.
All right, so what is Natalie's question? Has she come up with one?
I'm trying to figure out how to word my question, but it's something along the lines of, I get all the time, well, I think, that religion is good, but I think a lot of the other religions also have really good things too, and maybe everybody's just kind of right. Or even the, what is it, the Buddhist people that, are all about, self, and it's, all your inner self and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question is there just, a short answer to how do we know we're right?
Yeah. There's 2 types of religions. There is monotheism and polytheism. Mono meaning one, poly meaning multiple. Theism meaning gods. So either your worldview has to pick one or the other. Either there's one God or there's multiple gods. In religions where there's one God, you get things like you get Islam, you get Christianity, you get Judaism, and then you have the polytheistic religions where you get things like Hinduism where there's a bunch of gods, you get the Norse religions where there's a bunch of gods. There's more in monotheism if you go deeper into. There's more in both. You get Zoroastrianism. You get a bunch of weird stuff, but it's basically there's 2 religions, one God, multiple gods. I guess nowadays there's this new type of religion where there is no God, but even them, you find very very few atheists who are willing to dogmatically state there's no gods. Most of them are more agnostic about it. They're like, if there's a God, I've never seen it. Or they think maybe there's a spiritual force in nature. But most people, you as far as religions go, you fall into monotheism or polytheism. When it comes to polytheism, you run into a lot of, you know what, let's simplify this. We'll go back to this one. Definitionally and logically, there's not a easy answer. But other than to say which one is testable, so you have to look at historically which ones are and aren't accurate. Nobody, even atheists, argue that Jesus was not a real person. Nobody does. The Muslims don't argue it. Atheists don't argue it. Jews don't argue it. Everybody agrees Jesus was real. So at that point, it's like, okay, cool. The C.S. Lewis argument then applies. He's either a liar or lunatic or Lord because he claims to be God. So he's either a liar and he's not God, in which case a lot of people went to their deaths thinking he was and claiming that he was doing a lot of stuff. But that happens in other religions, so maybe. He's a lunatic, but too many people were seeing things. There's too many eyewitness testimonies for him to be a lunatic. And also what lunatic, like, it doesn't, he's too articulate and too much stuff makes sense. Or you end up with the third conclusion that he's Lord. Other religions are going to claim that Jesus is not God. That's the big problem that you have with Judaism. They say he was a good teacher who got killed by the Romans for his trouble. When you come to Islam, they say, no, he was a good prophet, but he was not God. He's just a good prophet. But the empty grave is one of the biggest thing. The big giant change that you see that spawns out of that is undeniable. It's the only one that's universal across the whole world. If you want to learn Islam and learn it correctly, the Quran is best translated into Arabic. And to try to understand it in another language, you're going to lose little bits of it. The Bible, you can still understand in English. I understand that we went deep into the weeds about Hebrew and Greek to understand it deeply and well. But you already understood it all in English. You had come to the same conclusion about what prayer was. You just didn't state it in the way I stated it. It can be understood in any language, to any nation, tribe, or tongue, to any education level. And that's kind of universal only to Christianity. So you already have that, but then when you get into the deeper part of the whole story of how things work out, that's where logically it has to make sense. And so you have the question of how does a wholly good, wholly just, and I choose those two words very specifically, he's very good and holy, and he's very just. How does that God forgive sin and let you live with him? He can't. He can't be in the presence of sin, but he has to be just and has to punish sin. So he needed something for this to work out, and he still needed to be able to set into motion free will and predestination hand in hand. And so logically, for him to enter his own creation as a human being and take everything on, it was the only way it was going to work to redeem everything. And even then, with the creation story, it's the only one that logically makes sense, because definitionally a God doesn't need to be created. But in all the other religions, like, there's always something different where you're like, logically this doesn't make sense, or historically this doesn't line up. What we find is the deeper and deeper you dig into Christianity, it's the only thing that does make sense, and nothing else makes sense except that it makes sense. To the extreme where we now know that we live in 10 dimensions, 4 that are knowable and 6 that are implied. But we knew that thousands of years ago. There was old boy Nachmanides, who was a Hebrew sage, and he knew that there was 10 dimensions just based on reading the Old Testament of the Bible. And then science, modern day, proves that later. The more and more we prove, the more and more we see everything. We find that the universe is not infinite. It's expanding, but there is a limit to it. There's a horizon on it. We find so many things that prove the Bible everywhere. If you find a watch in the woods, you don't think the watch just popped up. You think somebody made it. And the more you look at its design, the more you understand the designer. And I don't think any other religion really has this. But on top of that, none of them really explain why you would do what you would do. And none of them really offer a full picture of everything that makes sense. Rebekah.
So I have 2 questions.
Go ahead.
Well, the first one kind of plays into that. For the first one, could you elaborate more on... So, like, for Muslims and, like, Hindu or whatever it is, they believe that Jesus was a good prophet, but they don't necessarily believe that he died, went to hell for our sins, and rose again. Proof
no.
to that.
What? I heard the first part. They don't believe that, but what?
That, like, Jesus died on the cross, rose, like, went to hell, died for our sins, rose again.
Yeah. They do not believe that. They believe that...
So what would you say to that?
Oh, I mean, we already have too much historical evidence to prove that it happened. But even if you want to avoid the historical evidence, I mean, you really can't. There's too much. The Romans took a great care of detail, like writing stuff down. Josephus, the historian, took a great deal of detail writing stuff down. There are too many different eyewitness accounts from the apostles that we have written down from that time. It would be almost disingenuous. The question would be, one, why would anybody lie about that? And two, where's the body then? Like, it doesn't really make sense. But once you get past that, you have people who see him, the reincarnate version of him. Rebekah, you want to add anything else to that?
As far as like other different like things that prove, I don't remember if this was ever disproven. I'm pretty sure they found Lot's wife.
So yes and no. Yes, because of the whatever they're called.
Well, they found the pillar of salt.
No, but there was
That she
specifically
had turned into.
like the nucleic glass that's inside of it.
Yes, there's no reason for this substance to be where it's at, and for there to be a singular pillar of it just standing there. Like there are hundreds of resources that you could go look up just finding actual evidence of the Bible. That you could pull out.
Simon Wexler's a good one.
Yes, that you can pull out, because that's honestly how we know it's true. When I was in, during my Auburn years, there was a very popular opinion that all of the religions were all actually just one religion and the same. And it was a
Oprah used to say that.
special that had made it go
all
popular
roads
and
lead to
viral.
heaven.
And because of who I was friends with at the time, and who I was just around at the time, eventually someone came to me with this whole premise that it was one religion and that they all weren't the same. And I watched the video on it, and even in the video it was like comical to me, only because here they were trying to point out the similarities, and as they're pointing out the similarities, they're also pointing out all of the differences with these similarities. And so it was like, at the time I didn't have the confidence at the time to speak out and say something, but in my mind I knew, like, this is literally disproving itself. You can't sit here and try to say that this is all the same religion when not even all of them believe in the virgin birth. Not even all of them believe in a worldwide flood. Not all of them believe in, simple things that, like, are basic components of our religion. That, yes, some of the other ones do share similarities to, but no other religion shares every single similarity with Christianity. There is always going to be some small discrepancy in there, because Satan knows the truth. And Satan is very good at taking the truth and giving you all of it except for one little percentage of it that's not.
Or giving you just enough of it. He hides that truth in a lie, always.
And so
that's what he does when he talks to Jesus in the wilderness. He says, didn't God say?
So one of the main things, like, when somebody comes to you and tries to say that all religions are the same, for a fact, you do, as Charles always says, do your own research, but I will go ahead and tell you, we know for a fact there is no other religion out there that has all the same similarities as Christianity. So there is no religion that could be the same.
But to sum it up, if I was going to put it into three things, I would say we know it's true because of fulfilled prophecy. It's the only book that predicts the end from the beginning. We know that a lot of those prophecies are fulfilled. When you get to the Cyrus the Great, when he conquers Babylon, there's what's called the Cylinder of Cyrus, and it's in the museum in London. And it talks about Cyrus, and it says, like, how he conquered this and how he was blown away that he was presented by Daniel with the scroll of Ezekiel, I think, which predicted that, if I'm not mistaken, because now I'm doing this off the top of my head, God says, you'll know that I called you because I'm calling you by your name, Cyrus. I've given you this victory. And Cyrus conquered Babylon without fighting at all. The gates were open for him. It was brilliant, but it's neither here nor there. So we get fulfilled prophecy constantly in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. But on top of fulfilled prophecy, you also get accurate descriptions of the physical world, which is what I was saying. When you look deeper into the microcosm and the macrocosm, the tiny things, the big things, and all over the regular world, you see the fingerprints of God everywhere, and you find that the Bible matches it accurately every single time. And then the last thing I would say is logically and canonically, it's the only thing that makes sense. If you think about it rationally from beginning to end, how does it all make sense? How would this work? It's the only one that actually has a plausible plot line that makes sense from beginning to end. So that would be the three things I would say. How you know Jesus was alive? Well, the Bible says it, but how do we know the Bible's true? Well, we know how we got our Bible. But if we're not going to do that, how do we prove the Bible's true? Fulfilled prophecy, accurate description of the physical world, and logically, it's the only thing that makes sense canonically. And again, nobody historically disputes that Jesus lived. There's a reason that we use BC and AD. You ask yourself what happened 2,024 years ago that made last couple thousand years different than these ones. Only one thing comes to mind, you know?
Yeah. I agree.
I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Or if you had another
one. No, it did. It did perfectly.
What else you got?
You crushed it.
You got anything else for us?
I don't think so. I think that's it.
All right, Nat, you ready to go to bed?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, Nat, we'll talk to you again next time.
All right, love you.
Love you.
Love you.